Hey, Joe.
Mike, how are you?
Welcome. Hey, if you're checking this out today, we got a guest today. We got a fill-in, a brother from another mother. Yeah, that's right. Jim is not here today, so we got a replacement, our first guest, Joe Doyle.
How are you? Good.
You want to fill us in a little bit about what you're doing here and what you've done for...
Yeah, well, Jim couldn't make it. He copped out at the last minute.
Yeah.
So I filled in, although it was scheduled. But that's a shame Jim's not here. Joe Doyle. I was assistant principal at Truman for 22 years. Went to Armstrong. That was split between assistant principal and principal.
All
And I always thought that I would hate going to the middle school. Turns out I didn't.
Okay.
Actually got to like it. Great staff.
All right. Yeah. Middle school. I actually started my career at Armstrong.
Did you really?
Yeah, Jim Mannion was the principal.
Mannion tried, when he left the high school, he tried to get me to go with him to
Oh.
Armstrong. And I was so paranoid of going to the middle school that I turned him down.
Well, Jim Mannion, that was my first teaching position, 1989. I'm carrying a soda can to my classroom.
Right.
And one of the teachers says, "You can't drink that in your classroom." And I'm like, "What?" "No, Mr. Mannion won't allow you. You can't drink in the
He
classroom."
didn't like that.
He didn't like that. No chewing gum either. No chewing gum. No.
Jim had his little idiosyncrasies.
Yeah, well, you're a new teacher and you think you're finally an adult.
Yeah.
You got your first adult job and you can't chew gum or drink soda in the classroom.
He gave up on that later in his career. But
anyhow.
In the beginning, when I came back from New Hope Soulbury after my 2-year hiatus up there, Jim was the principal at Truman.
Okay.
And Bowles and I started as assistant principals the same time, the same year.
I don't think Mr. Bowles ever left the cafeteria without something.
Well, Joe was a forager.
I'd have lunch duty, and here comes Bowlesy.
He used to like to forage.
Yeah, well, anyhow, we're here today to really talk about teacher observations.
Yes, very important.
I've been, I guess, 35 years. I've had probably maybe 30 teacher observations. The last 5 years, I don't know if you're familiar, but they're doing something called differentiated instruction.
Right.
And you don't have to do an observation anymore. You have to do a project. Mm-hmm. Look, I'll be honest with you. I'd much rather be observed than to do a year-long project. But I guess it's a way to cut down on, cut down on principal responsibilities maybe? I don't know. Maybe cut the workload down. But I think for the last 5 years, I haven't been observed. I wasn't observed for the last 5 years.
Well, I always thought as an administrator, and you've been observed 30 times in your career. I've probably done 350 observations over my career. But I was always pleased. Bristol Township always had a very good staff. I always said to people, administrators from other districts, that at some point I would like to swap staffs. And I always thought that Bristol Township staff members, teachers, could get more out of students in another district.
Right.
Than vice versa.
Right.
So, always great staff. But, I think administrators have to develop before anything else, you have to develop a good relationship with your staff, which I always tried to do by being out in the building.
Right.
And not necessarily going in for observations, but just popping in 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. I used to try to hit the Armstrong classrooms every morning, both floors in the back, just go from one room to the other.
Right.
Ask the kids, pop in.
No, I always liked walkthroughs. They were always my favorite. And I thought principals that did walkthroughs were always more effective. Mm-hmm. Just because you saw what was going on at the spur of the moment and you could see if there's something happening.
Yeah. Holly used to get mad at me at Armstrong because she could never find me in the morning.
I did look up, and I want to give a shout out to a Mrs. Beers.
Mrs. Beers.
Perfect, right? Perfect for our topic.
Hey, it's
teachers tapped out of education.
Tapped out of education.
Tapped into beer.
So Mrs. Beers.
So I found a website.
Appropriate.
Yeah, how appropriate. She has a website. So shout out to mrsbeers.com. She's a 7th grade ELL teacher for 24 years out of Cincinnati, Ohio.
Okay.
And on her website, she gives tips for observations.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, you know what? Let's start off with
For teachers, or
I guess for
how
teachers.
not to be panicked by a
Yeah, I know. New teachers, first time observation. I don't know, but I think these are pretty good tips. You probably have some good tips too. But let me just read her tips. First one: be well prepared.
I would agree with that.
Yes, complete all pre-observation paperwork. Now you're probably not familiar with that.
Not familiar with that. No.
The new, and you teachers out there, the new procedure is when you get an email,
Right.
and in that email you're told you're being observed, and you have to fill out a pre-observation form asking you for your goals and objectives, and the standards have to be included, and your procedures.
All we ever had to do was show up, walk in. Teacher was supposed to give us their lesson plan for the day,
And
there was no pre-observation.
that was a beautiful time. This is not a beautiful time. Okay, there's teachers out there. I think we talked about it earlier about differentiated instruction. I hadn't been observed in the last 5 years.
Mhm.
Well, that was a lot of work, but the pre-observation paperwork can be a bit
daunting.
Yeah. Second one is set goals linked to standards. All about the standards now. Oof.
I would agree with the set goals, and if there are standards,
They gotta
then
link to the
certainly they
standards.
should
Well,
link somehow.
As a special education teacher, and I always say this, I taught ID in an LS classroom,
Mm-hmm.
ID,
Mm-hmm.
intellectually disabled,
Yes.
in a life skills classroom
Mm-hmm.
for about 25 years.
The
So
labels were slightly different back then, but
we had something called the alternative standards.
yeah, all right.
But those alternative standards were the alternative standards,
Okay.
because those alternative standards never really matched up to the curriculum that we were doing.
Right.
So anyhow, so teachers out there, second was set goals and link to standards.
Mhm.
Important. Number 3, manage your time, your instructional time. I personally never done this, but this Mrs. Beers suggests you actually make a timed schedule. So
Mhm.
from 9 o'clock to 9:05, I'm going to do my intro. From 9:05 to 9:15, I'm going to do
I can see
modeling.
that because I observed one time a new teacher, and they spoke so fast.
the
They
nerves. That's the
apologized
nerves.
to me later because the 45-minute period, they were done and wrapped up in about 22 minutes. So they,
Then you don't know what to do with the rest of the
they
time.
didn't know what to do. They were juggling.
Yeah, so you new teachers out there, you may want to make a little time schedule. That could be helpful. Next one, tie classroom observation to your professional learning. Maybe your building goals.
Mm-hmm. I can see that.
I got to be honest with you. That's a bit much.
Yeah,
That's a lot. I mean, that's a good tip, but I don't know if I'm thinking of my professional learning goals. And I know each building every year sets some kind of
Mhm.
professional goal for the building.
Right.
But I don't know if I've ever linked it to my lesson.
Yeah, I don't know. One of our goals was always, I know every year, was improving attendance. So
you were good at that.
So
I forgot about that.
How you could incorporate that in a lesson plan?
I don't know. Well,
but
that's a tip here. So, and the last tip, she only has 5 tips. How will you show the student learning? That's I
would definitely agree with that.
Evidence of them learning.
We used to call it checking for understanding.
Yeah, checking for understanding.
Right.
Now you have to show evidence.
Okay.
I always like this I had a little strategy. It's called ticket out the door.
I love that.
Teachers out there, little trick. Have a little notepad on your desk. Maybe you can make them up. Go to the old thermofax machine, the ditto machine, and run out 1,000 ticket out the doors. Or today you could just email it to yourself.
There was a science teacher at Truman who I saw that for the first time, and she called it an exit ticket. And she just used 3x5 cards, passed one out, and she posed a question to the class.
Right.
And said, write down on this and hand it to me. And she stood by the door as they exited. And she told me later what she would do is go through them, and it would give her an idea as to how effective she was.
Yeah, look, straight up, you really need to know what your students have learned to teach your next lesson.
Well,
So
we used to follow something called, and I won't belabor the point, but it was Madeline Hunter.
oh yes,
And if you remember that term,
I do.
and she broke the lesson down into some really finite parts. But what you do want to do is you have to ascertain their level of understanding so that you know at what point do I just abandon this lesson because nothing worked? Or is it okay? Did they all get it? Or 90% of them get it and I can move forward?
I can move forward. Right. That's what you're there for. Now, teaching ID in an LS classroom, my goals of my classroom seem to go in circles.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what we learned today,
Sure.
we may have to relearn tomorrow.
I could see that.
And maybe relearn the next day
Sure.
too.
Mm-hmm.
So,
The retention is not.
Yeah. We used to, there used to be this, you probably have heard this, but we'd have to do extended school year, and we'd have to do we have to measure outcomes between breaks. So when the students would leave, we'd do progress monitoring before they left for Christmas break, and then we'd have to ascertain, did they retain those?
Well, if you
that
remember,
progress.
If you remember Armstrong, we got into the point with PSSA. We were doing foresight. Remember that?
I'm lucky enough not to ever really have to do PSSA.
Now, you at the high school level, it wasn't that prevalent, but at the middle school, it was implemented on a quarterly basis.
Right.
And then we had to assess the foresight scores and then move kids around to remediation so that we could remediate them. My understanding is now that that's not the case.
No, I know. I'm going to say it. My wife talks about LinkedIn or link it tests.
Yeah,
I think there's something different this year. I think she talked about a new program this year. I'm not familiar with it, but look, measuring progress always important. Measuring understanding always important. So a shout out to Miss Spears, MissSpears.com. Pretty cool website. A lot of information on the website. I may give her a holler, let her know we talked about her website, and I love the fact that we talk about beer here all the time. And what
Mrs.
a better
Beers.
name, Mrs. Beers. So I don't know if you want to have any tips for those teachers out there.
Before Madeline Hunter, and when I started at Delhas in '75 as a shop teacher, and what people used to tell us was follow the old military. And I said, the military method of instruction? What are you talking about? And they said, well, tell them what they're going to learn or the objective.
Right.
Teach to the objective. And then assess
Makes
your
sense.
effectiveness when you're done. I mean, pretty simple when you think about it. Yeah. And you can slice that up 100 different ways.
Right.
And give each category, subcategory identification. But the bottom line is you better look at how effective you were. Otherwise, do you move on as an instructor? Or do you go back and reteach certain areas because the level of understanding was just not where it needed to be?
That I'll tell you what, I think teachers and your teacher observations, I think sometimes they try to do too much, accomplish too much. I like what you just said, those 3 key things to think about. Not do this, do that. Do what you can accomplish.
Right. And some people also say, they call it the do method. I do, we do, you do. In other words, I as a teacher are going to demonstrate something, and then I'm going to have you do it while I observe it.
Wow.
And collect data on it. And then I'll give an assignment based on that where you're going to do it.
Right.
While I assess it.
Keep it simple.
Right.
And I
don't overcomplicate.
I think we really overcomplicate it sometimes.
I would agree.
Yeah. So good advice. And
don't be panicked over observations.
Don't.
Although now I understand they don't do them anymore, so it's.
Well,
I find that hard to believe.
Right, new teachers. I think there's a responsibility from those new teachers now.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, they have to get so many the new teachers, and somebody like me, I don't know, they don't come and they don't visit me anymore. Walkthroughs every once in a while.
I love walkthroughs. I used to walk into classrooms at Armstrong, like I said, in the morning, and I would pop in for 5 minutes, and I'd walk up and down the aisles and say to the kids, "Well, what are you learning today?"
That's cool.
And they'd say, we're working on multiplication, Mr. Doyle. And I'd say, oh, yeah, well, explain it to me. What are you doing? And kids would tell you in their own words what they're doing. And then I would say, so you think I ought to keep her? Whoever the teacher was.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Mr. Doyle, you can keep her. She's good. I said, so I shouldn't let her go? No, I don't let her go.
Well, listen, I got some news for you. I found an observation that you did on me.
Really?
From 2003.
That was 3 years before I went to
Wow. So I was looking through my old paperwork, and lo and behold, it's an observation. Now, I after I read this, it started to come back to me.
Right.
This observation. Before we start talking about this, Mr. Doyle, maybe you can tell me the date on this observation.
That would have been June the 5th of 2003. So probably, ballpark speaking, it was probably either a week or 2 weeks before the end of the school year.
Now,
I must have gotten a memo from central office saying
is that appropriate to observe a teacher the week before school ends?
Sure, why not?
Now, I remember this observation because I think I recollect you coming to my door just randomly, maybe it might have been the 8th period.
Right.
And we start to have a little conversation back and forth. Maybe we'll talk about the Eagles.
Okay.
All right. Hey, shout out to the Eagles. Big playoff game this weekend.
Yes, it is.
But we probably talked sports. Probably talked about the family.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe 15 minutes in to the class.
I said,
I'm here to observe you. I'm like, what? You're here to observe me?
Well, you weren't showing a movie.
So I must have thrown something together because it was a pretty good observation. I got all back then. There was just yes, no.
Yeah, that was the observation.
Yes, no, or NA, which would be not applicable.
I also found one before I came up when you told me what you were going to talk about today. So I dug through my stuff, which is now 13 years old because I've been gone 13 years.
Yeah.
And actually, the number of check boxes greatly expanded from then until this one. So that was probably about.
Well, we don't do checklists anymore.
No,
we do a lot. And the teachers out there, we do a long dissertation. I think it's almost pre and then post.
Pre and post.
We have P and post.
Well, I always did a post. We always called the teacher in after the observation to go over it and provide any, suggestions or praise as necessary.
Did you ever get called in? You called a teacher in for the observation, and you read them the observation, and it was the wrong observation?
I don't think ever. No.
Well, I've been. There was. Yeah, I was in on. I did an I was observed, and then the principal, which I won't name, after you left, he called me in, sat down, and he starts to go over the observation with me, and I said, "That's not what I did in class." And he said, "Well,
interesting.
Your name is on it."
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, how did I do?" He said, "Excellent." I said, He said, "Will you sign it?" And I said, "I sure will." So I signed it, and that was done. But it wasn't what I did. I think what I threw together for you, and we played a game. And this is a bit of advice for young teachers out there. You came in and observed me playing a game. It was a review game.
It's fine.
It was categories. So young teachers out there, there's actually now a computer program online called Categories, and you can pull it up on your smartboard. But back then, I actually had the board game Categories.
Right.
And you observed me. I put students in groups. I had cards made up. It was like a health lesson or something we were reviewing.
Okay.
And I had cards made up. And I tell you what, it's a great little way to create student involvement.
Which you always want.
It's a great way.
At some level.
Right. And especially in my classroom, ID and LS kids, just getting them motivated, getting involved was important. So categories, you can put them in groups. It works where you put a category up there. So maybe, there's 10 categories, and it'd be health words. So it'd be like junk food. And then it would be places to eat, and then you'd roll the dice, and it'd be
Mhm.
an alphabet dice, and you'd get a letter B,
Right.
and then the kids would have to then say, "Oh, a junk food that starts with B," or a
Right.
place to eat that starts with B, and they'd have like 2 or 3 minutes to come up with their list, and then you'd go over the list. So it's a great way to review a topic. It's
And
a
have
great
the students actively participate.
actively involved, and then there's you check for understanding.
Sure.
Anyhow, that's
Probably the most important, in my opinion, that's probably the most important thing that an instructor or teacher can do is check for the level of understanding. Otherwise, how do you ever
right,
know,
correct,
do I move on? Do I reteach something?
right?
Or start a whole new topic tomorrow?
Yeah. And for the young teachers out there, it's a great way to throw something together and you look like a great teacher.
Well,
Even if you're struggling. Even if you're struggling. So
Yeah.
it's funny that I was observed here June 5th, okay?
Yeah.
Because another principal in my building, and I'll just use his first name, George, he also came in one year, last week of school, and said, "Mike, I'm going to come observe you tomorrow." I'm like, "What?
Mhm.
It's the last week of school. We got 8 days left or something." So I thought I'd do something really, really like bold of me. I thought my class, it was an English class with
Mhm.
my ID kids. We read a short story, Oedipus Rex.
Mhm.
So if you know Oedipus Rex,
Oh yeah.
So principal comes in, sits down. We do a little short story, Oedipus Rex. We talk about how Oedipus slept with his mother, poked his eyeballs out. Kids loved it. They were really involved. And then they asked me, "Mr. McHugh, have you ever seen Josh's mom?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" "Well, Josh has got the hottest mom in the class. Would you sleep with her?" And I said, "What are you talking about?"
Well, that went a direction
So,
you didn't
yeah.
intend.
So, because Oedipus slept with his mom,
Right? Yeah. Sure.
my classroom devolved into a discussion about who would sleep with whose mom. And of course, George in the background, the principal back there, big smile on his face, enjoying
I'm
every
sure.
minute as I struggled trying to get my students
to wrestle it back in.
Let's not have this discussion. But that's what you get when you come to a teacher's classroom on June 5th, okay?
Well, yeah.
On June 5th, you don't show up to a classroom teacher and say, "I'm observing you tomorrow."
Right. Well, probably as I said, what preceded that was George got a memo from central office saying he was 5 observations short of the So
Anyhow, that's just I don't know. It's a tough. Listen, I almost like when you showed up. It almost like that way of just showing up.
so did I.
You can't. You're not nervous. You're not
Right.
worried about it, and not able to sleep the night before thinking I got this big
Exactly.
observation tomorrow.
Right.
Just show up and do your thing. And if you're a good teacher,
It certainly has its stress.
Yeah,
because
right,
people
right,
shows
right.
up they show up on your doorstep and announce that. But again, as you just mentioned, you didn't spend the whole night before
correct.
worrying about it.
Right. I know one day our superintendent, she came into the room and sat at a desk.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at that time, we did walkthroughs, so I thought she was just here for a walkthrough.
Right.
And I said, welcome. I made a little small talk, and I said to her, "I don't think you're supposed to be in this room." Now, if you remember my room, I was in
You belong in the room next door.
the home economics suite.
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
So my room never had a number on the door.
Right.
It was always
that
that
suite had some
awkward sub rooms.
Right.
And A14 was my room, but she belonged in A15.
Mm-hmm.
And when I questioned if she belonged in my room, she said, "I can sit in any room at any time." And I said, "You're welcome."
That's right.
Here we go. And then about 5 minutes in, she got up and left. She was supposed to be in A15. So
Well, there you go. She was in the wrong room.
She was in the wrong room. Anyhow, that's it, I guess.
Yeah.
You have anything else? You have one of those stories that you want to throw out there?
Quite honestly, all I want to say is Bristol Township had some of the best teaching staff.
Yeah,
And-
we
and-
really did.
And I know that because I spent 2 years in New Hope, Salisbury, which supposedly
Was the
one
cream
of
of the
most
crop?
cream of the crop in the county. And They were a good staff too, but
It just
I
didn't-
always thought that Bristol Township teachers, they knew how to get as much out of kids
as anybody
as they could
Well,
possibly.
I always, and I think I said this earlier in the year. If you've been following the podcast, I taught special ed my entire career, and very proud of that. We always had I guess, continuum of services available for all disabilities. I always thought that we never farmed our kids out. I know other districts would send would send students to us because they didn't offer the services, and I was always proud of what I did and who I taught and where I taught.
Well, being a shop teacher, and I guess the same goes to say for art teachers and business ed teachers, I always thought it was easy for us to get active participation by kids and get them involved and assess what they were doing because the kids loved doing it. It was a break from their English, social studies. I always had the highest of praise for anybody that could entertain 30 kids with a piece of chalk on a blackboard.
It's tough.
I had so much.
I know the teachers
fun stuff.
To
entertain kids, that it was almost too easy.
Yeah, good old shop teachers. We had good old.
I don't know how many are
good old
left.
Walt and Ed,
Walt.
Oh God,
Yeah,
those stories.
Bill.
I don't know Bill.
The photography teacher.
Oh yeah. Bill,
who just passed away, by the way.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, recently. Yeah. I mean, I don't mean like last week, but recently.
Yeah, it's getting.
Yeah,
it's getting
I mean,
there.
when I came back from New Hope, Salisbury to Truman in '84, I mean, there were like 7 tech ed teachers, 6 art teachers. And I mean, I don't know what they're.
We had
now,
a pretty.
but I know
we had a pretty big,
pretty extensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now we have. I think we have. We don't call it shop anymore. We call it. It's engineering.
STEM.
Yeah, STEM and
right.
PTLW, whatever. And
we like to change those acronyms to keep people.
Yeah. But we do. We have a great art department.
Yeah, always did.
We have a great art department. We have great students, artistic students. We have a lot of that.
Yes.
Great music department,
talented.
great theater department.
Very
Fantastic.
talented.
Hey, listen, I'll leave you with one more story.
Go ahead.
Another George does a Joe Doyle, just shows up in my classroom and says, Mike, I'm here to observe you. It was probably in June again. Well, it's probably late in the year because I was in health. It was a health class I was teaching. It was a unit on sexual reproductive system. I said, George, you're welcome to come in. Just come in and sit down. Comes in, sits down, and I start to review the vocabulary words. I do the
Well, you should do.
Right, ovaries,
right,
sperm, penis.
Should have evoked a few chuckles.
Yeah, well, I say penis, and happens to be a female student raises her hand and says, "Mr. McHugh, is that the kind you can eat?"
Yeah.
And I don't know what to say. I look at George. He has a big smile on his face.
I'm sure he did.
And he says, "You can take this one." I'm like, "Yeah, I think I can." And I say to myself, "Man, what is she thinking?" And I say, "I didn't say peanuts. I said penis." And the whole class just burst out in laughter. But I guess she got that confused.
Yeah, probably did.
I can see that happening. But of course, having the principal sit next to me and experience what it's like to teach and just get, the real world, whatever, day to day, what we get, the teachers know what I'm talking about. Kids say the darndest things. And so that's it, Joe.
All right. Thanks for the invite.
I want to maybe.
Sorry I missed Jim.
Yeah, I know.
But he's under the weather.
Poor Jim's under the weather. But like I said, it's Joe. It's Joe, a brother from another mother. Yeah. I don't know, the kids, I guess. Jim told me to say that, the kids would get you confused. I guess the gray hair. Probably the gray hair. He's been gray forever. You've been gray as long as I've known you. You've been gray. So
that happened.
That gray hair
in my 30s.
So that happened to Jim, and I think in his 30s too. So the two peas in a pod.
Well, I had you at Truman on the Truman staff, and I had your wife and Jim.
Yeah.
When I went to Armstrong.
Small world.
So yeah, it's a small world.
So good luck to the Eagles this weekend.
Yes, very good luck.
EAGLES, Eagles.
We'll see.
I know, we'll see.
They looked off. The Rams looked off good the other night.
Yeah, they did
but
look
we'll
good,
see.
but I think we got
think
them.
the Eagles
We
are
got
better.
their number.
Yeah, I think we do.
All right, so we'll check you out next week. Joe, thanks for being here.
Not a problem. Anytime.
All right, and we end our podcast with a little saying:
Okay.
with every pore, there's a story.
Well, that's true.
See ya.